Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's review, we are going to be taking a look at a couple different brewers' double or Imperial IPA offerings. Kind of use them interchangeably, it doesn't really matter. If it's above a standard, it's Imperial. They can subcategorize it, double, triple, quad, it doesn't matter. It's all really up to discretion of the brewer. Nonetheless, for today's, you may already have a guess just by seeing this pretty wicked artwork on the label here. We have got County Brewers Collective. This is Pile of Brains. This is an Imperial or double IPA. This one's been double dry hopped and it clocks in at 8.8% ABV. They are based out of Brooklyn, New York. And this was actually brewed in collaboration with LIC Beer Project, which I presume is Long Island City Beer Project. Long Island City is a neighborhood in Queens, just north of Brooklyn. I used to live in Brooklyn in the Williamsburg area. It's just a little north of where that is. But nonetheless, this one's been brewed with a blend of Citra, Mosaic, and Cashmere hops. So Cashmere, not a hop that you get in a lot of IPAs, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing how it blends. For number two, we've got Noble Ale Works. This is Tongue Tickles, also a double or Imperial IPA, 8% on this one. They are based out of Anaheim, California, and this one has a blend of Citra, Galaxy, and Simcoe. So we've got commonality bleeding over here with Citra in both within a reasonable range of each other in terms of ABV, and both double IPAs. So ought to be a really fun review. I always like trying new beers, and today, Noble Ale Works, I've heard a lot about them. This is the very first beer I will have ever had by this brewer, so I am particularly excited about that. So we're going to get jumping right in with the Kings County Brewers Collective, Pile of Brains. This is the collaboration brew with LIC Beer Project, Citra, Mosaic, and Cashmere hops. They are based out of Brooklyn, New York, and this one clocks in at 8.8% ABV. Okay, so jumping right in with the first beer of today's double or Imperial IPA review, we have got Kings County Brewers Collective, collaborative brew with LIC Beer Project, Pile of Brains. This is double dry hopped, 8.8% ABV, and brewed with a blend of Mosaic, Citra, and Cashmere hops. Cashmere is not a hop that you often find in IPAs. They're out there, but it's not that common, so I'm really excited about that. And again, they are based out of Brooklyn, New York. I didn't state this in the intro, but this is another review of beers I've gotten from Tavour. So I keep having just great luck, so I'm going to keep ordering from them. These are beers I can't get my hands on otherwise. So nonetheless, let's start with the label art. Theirs are always awesome. It's got rather a zombie theme and still keeping true to their kind of comic book art style that they do on the labels. It looks particularly awesome. Honestly, if any beers were worth keeping around after you're done with them just for the sake of the can art, theirs are among the best in my opinion. Nonetheless, let's get this bad boy cracked gently. Gently. There it is. All right. Poured right in the glass here. All right. That was quite a nice pour. Sometimes I do it particularly well and sometimes I do it quite poorly, but that one worked out quite beautifully in my humble opinion. All right, so starting off, I could tell you I could already smell it from that far away. We'll get to the aroma in a minute, but visually, this is a beautiful beer. It is a hazy, it is a double dry hopped Imperial hazy IPA, no question about it, and it is beautiful. Just a perfect color, nice bit of cloudiness to it, and it is very occluded. Formed a nice head, a nice creamy head. I gave it a chance. It's hard to see the carbonation even if I'm getting up on it. It's just so thick and cloudy in appearance, you can't really tell. But it formed a decent head, so I assume it's going to hold okay. I don't see a lot of activity rushing up from the bottom to try to break it down. And this does have, as I said, a pungent aroma. So if I get near it and just give it a slight little swirl, oh, it just smells so fresh. It smells very, very juicy, a classic hazy, and this is a big one. I mean, it just smells, it really does smell quite fruity. So you get some classic hop aromas. You can get a little bit of a citrusy and an earthy and a pine-like undertone in there. but it also smells very fruity. So you're getting some of the tropical fruit aromas, which don't come out in all IPAs, but I'm definitely getting them in this. And that's in tandem with what smells very kind of orange and grapefruit-like, as well as pineapple, which we just reviewed an IPA an episode or two ago that had this really pronounced pineapple aroma, and it's lovely. I mean, it really is smells just fantastic. Smells like a big old glass of fresh fruit hop juice. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Mm. Mm. Oh, that's huge. That is a delicious big IPA. Wow. Okay, this is intense for a hazy. It is intense. Man, that's huge. All right, so before I get to flavors, because it's going to take me a few dives in to pick them all out. It's very complex. I'll start by saying it's pungent. It's pungent. It was pungent in aroma and it's pungent in flavor. This is one of the biggest intensity of flavors in an IPA, really any beer, but an IPA that I've had in a long time. It is huge. This beer is massively intense. Body and mouthfeel. The body, I would say, is kind of on the border between medium and medium heavy. It's more or less in range where I'd expect for 8.8. Sure, it's a double and Imperial, but the ABV's not that out of control. It's 8.8. It feels appropriate for the ABV. Mouthfeel, it's got some thickness to it. It's not syrupy, but it's definitely got some thickness to it. And when you agitate it around the palate, it does get a little thicker, a little creamy. Not crazy like some do, but it does kind of intensify the thickness factor to it. Now we're going to have to jump in for another sip because these flavors are all over the board and they're huge. You first get it in your mouth and you get this intense, juicy quality. And it puts me in mind of orange juice mixed with something else. Then as soon as you swallow, that is paired immediately with classic hop flavors. So you're getting a big boatload of citrus hop flavors that really come in and help accentuate the kind of citrus side of the fruit side of the flavor profile that's coming out. And you also get a big boatload of earthy hop flavors that come through. Just a little hint of pine. It's not huge, but there is just a little. I would presume that's coming predominantly from the citrus side because that does, in terms of flavor profiles, while it is probably aptly named because of the massive citrus aroma and flavors, it does produce this kind of resiny pine quality to it as well, much akin to Simcoe or Magnum or something like that. It's subtle, but it's in there. It's just so intense. As soon as you swallow it, just bam. The intensity of this beer just hits you in full force. In tandem with that, I smelled a little hint of some tropical fruit hop aromas that came through. There was a little exotic fruity flavor that mixes in with here. I can't pinpoint what I think it tastes like, but it doesn't taste citrusy. It tastes like tropical fruit, and I can't tell you what it is, but it's definitely in there. Honestly, I would really have to think on this and pick it apart to determine what fruit it is. It's one that I've had, but it's not one that I've eaten much or that is all that common. So it definitely tastes like an exotic fruit, though I couldn't tell you what it is. Maybe a lychee or something. Nonetheless, very, very good. Very, very pulled, very, very pungent, and it just whacks you with its intensity. It's full hop flavors and force, and immediately paired with just a boatload of bitters. This is a really massively bitter hazy, to be certain, and especially for an Imperial. I've mentioned this many, many times. You start to add more fermentables in to boost up the ABV, and oftentimes the malt bill will overshadow the hop. And that is not happening here. The hop is absolutely the star of the show. It is big and bold and intense. In terms of balance, I'm not sure I would change a thing in this. I really like the blend of hops that they put in here and the intensity. They have extracted full alphas in the boil, and they've extracted tons of aroma and flavor by certainly adding some dry hopping for quite a bit of time here. It's very hoppy, and it's adding all of these character traits right into the beer. For the finish, it's got a pretty long finish, though it's not as long as you might expect. Don't get me wrong, it's not short, but compared to the standard IPAs in the last review, it doesn't have quite the same staying power. It hits you up front, and it's big and intense, and it holds for a good while, but it kind of disappears and doesn't linger around the palate quite like many do. But it's still a very long finish indeed. This is a very, very good beer. This is a beer that I think is for any true hophead, fan of hazies or otherwise. I recommend this one. If you like big, intense hop character and bitters, this is one definitely worth seeking. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to our second beer. This is the Noble Ale Works Tongue Tickles, clocking in at 8% ABV. Okay, now moving on to the second beer of today's double or Imperial IPA review, we have got Noble Ale Works Tongue Tickles. This is 8% ABV, and they are based out of Anaheim, California. It's brewed with a blend of Citra, Galaxy, and Simcoe, so we're looking at another lineup of very high alpha acid content hops. And I have heard great things about this brewer, first beer I've ever had from them, and specifically I have heard tremendous things about this beer, so I'm very excited. In terms of label art, it's very, very subdued. It's very basic. It's got what looks kind of like a shield or a coat of arms. It says Noble Ale Works, established California, Anaheim, 2009. So they've been around a decade. Little purple kind of label for the name, and that's about the extent. It's very basic. It looks very clean. I'm a fan of the design. It's very clean. So without further ado, let's get this cracked gently. Cans always make me so nervous. I've been very good for like the last 15 or 20 reviews. I haven't had one get away from me. All right, let's get this poured right in the glass. Oh yeah, that's a lovely looking IPA. Give it a little agitation. Give it a chance to form a head here. I was going very smooth to start. Oh yeah, that formed a nice head. In fact, I'm not going to quite get the whole can in there because I really let it do its thing. Visually, this is not a hazy at all. This is a standard looking IPA, though it's a double. And in fact, it's got more of a standard IPA hue to it. Most doubles have that kind of caramelly, that kind of orange, deeper amber hue. This one looks like a standard IPA. It's just a double, 8%. It's close enough to classify as a double for sure. And the carbonation I'm seeing is very slow, but it is still quite active, and it's very super fine. Tiny champagne-like bubbles. So I am sure that played a part into producing this just lush, thick, creamy head on top. Look at that. That won't even drip off of my finger. That is just thick, thick, lush foam. Get a little sample, but I'm not thinking about it. All right, I'm going to top that off. That looks great. Now this one, unlike the prior, I cannot smell from a great distance, so I'm going to have to get right up on this beer to give it a sniff. Okay, the aroma is not super pronounced, but what I do smell smells very good. It smells like a really big hop-forward IPA. Really nothing crazy there. The hops really overshadow getting any hint of the malt bill. It's obviously lighter, so I'm sure it's got a cleaner, crisper, lighter malts in here. Maybe some pills, some carapils, probably some Turo. Lightly roasted. And that's probably going to do this beer a boon in terms of letting the hop play through versus having to fight against the malt bill for profiles and characteristics in terms of flavor. So I do expect the hops to be quite present, even though it doesn't have a pungent aroma. I do expect them to come through fully. I also do expect if they extracted alphas into the base and a good bit with that malt bill, or excuse me, with that hop bill, that it's going to have a nice bitter kick to it, because without those caramelly, heavier, deeper roasted malts in an Imperial, typically you are going to get more of that hop presence and bitter presence. So we're about to find out. Looks great. Smells good. Let's jump right in. Yeah. God, it smells so fresh. It actually has a slight caramel scent to it. That's what I'm picking up on the nose. A little caramel mixed with earth and pine. So let's jump in. Oh, that's really good. Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. Boy, that is hop present. That's got a nice bitter kick to it. And the hops really come through quite clearly. Okay, so what smells very caramelly on the nose comes through in the flavor profile with just the slightest hint of caramel. It's kind of like a cross between toffee and caramel. It's somewhere in the middle. It splits the difference between the two. But what comes through dominant in that flavor profile is a very present and earthy hop flavor that comes through in the beer. In fact, there's really only two of the major kind of categories, and I'm not sure how many other people use my descriptors, but earthy is what I taste. It tastes of the earth, earthy. I don't know how else to describe it. If you've drunk a lot of IPAs, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the same flavor that I attribute to, say, classic British Fuggle hops or some of the German and Czech noble hops. They have that. They're not citrusy. They don't taste piney or resinous. They don't taste tropical. They taste hoppy, and they have kind of this earthy quality to them. They taste of the earth. So that's really what I'm getting dominant here, with just the slightest twinge of pine in the background. But it's very, very nice. Very, very nice beer here. I'm going to jump back in for body and mouthfeel before I start really thinking on that. I'm going to be processing the flavors, but I'm going to jump in for at least a third dive. Body on this one is a solid medium heavy. It feels great. It feels fully appropriate for the ABV range. Mouthfeel? You can tell there's some thickness to the beer, but again, it's not one that is syrupy at all. It's got thickness, it's got viscosity, but overall it just feels like thicker water. And in tandem with that, if you do agitate it around the pellet, as I've done twice now, it gets ridiculously creamy, ridiculously so. And it gets far, far thicker in the mouth. So you should know, if you roll your beers around the palate to let all the flavors interplay all over your taste buds and kind of stick around so you can get the most out of your beer sip, which I do, and I highly recommend it. If you're really trying to analyze a beer, it's the best way to taste one. If you just taste a blank sip like you're trying to get down a PBR or something, you're not going to get everything that the craft beer is trying to let you understand fully. And I'm telling you, it gets ridiculously creamy and very, very, very thick. Okay, so that's my takeaways on body and mouthfeel. Love it. And the balance of it and how this beer presents itself and its flavor profile, absolutely love it. So I'm going to jump back in to explore how this flavor profile fully develops and how it finishes. It doesn't seem to me like it's got a super long finish that's at least intense, but I'm getting a very nice linger in the back that's still got a pretty, very clear and recognizable presence. So on the surface, it doesn't seem that long from the initial intensity, but once the intensity backs off, it just kind of holds static. It never really finishes off the bell curve. It's just holding at this lower level of intensity, but not letting the flavor go at all. So realistically speaking, the finish is quite long. So let's jump in and see exactly how it develops. Oh, it's so good. Oh, it's so big. It's so big and intense up front. Just hop flavors, boom, with a boot full of bitters, and boom, and they're just in tandem. And it's like equal parts of bitters and hop flavors, and they just hold there for about a good 10 seconds. It's pine and earthy, almost 50-50, with just bitters, and it's just holding there 15 seconds, and then it finally starts its descent, and it's reasonably quick on the descent. And if we're looking at this as the bell curve, it kind of drops to about that level, and it just holds there. It doesn't really seem to peter off in intensity at all. It just holds in flat lines at this lower peak intensity of the flavors and the bitters, but it just keeps going and going and going and going. It's got a very, very, very long finish. This is such a good beer. This is such a good beer. I always try them if there's a new beer anyway. I don't care about the style, but IPAs, I'll try hazies, I'll try Imperials, triples, doubles, quads, whatever they want to throw at me. I'll try them with additives, without them. But I always like trying new ones. I'm a massive hophead. I love IPAs. If there's a new IPA I haven't tried and it comes across my path, there's a 99% chance I'm going to grab it. And this one is really impressing me. Both of these Imperials or doubles are absolutely impressing me. I don't normally enjoy them as well as I am today, but both of these beers are earning their stripes as bigger, more intense versions of a regular IPA, and that is the highest compliment I can give an Imperial, a double, a triple, a quad, because so far more often than not, you get a beer that the malt just overpowers the hops, and neither of these are that way. The hop is the star, and it's just even bigger and more intense, and it's just lovely. If you are a fan of IPAs, both of these beers are absolute home runs. I'm going to jump in one more sip for final thoughts here. It's just so good. God, it's so intense. It hits you so big up front. It's just boom, hop. Welcome to Hop Town. It's just hop, bitter, and flavor, and it's so intense, and it just holds and holds and holds and holds, and it's still holding at that peak intensity. And then finally it starts to slowly drop down, and then it just holds. It just refuses to go away. This is such a fantastic beer. Both of these today, these are just absolute fantastic double IPAs. I have loved both of them. I'm going to take my time sipping on this, every last drop. It's just so good. I'm going to come up with my scores, and when we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with the County Brewers Collective Pile of Brains, both Imperial IPAs today. This one's double dry hopped, clocking in at 8.8% ABV. Kings County Brewers Collective is based out of Brooklyn, New York. This one specifically was a collaborative brew with LIC Beer Project and has a blend of Mosaic, Citra, and Cashmere hops in it. So it was one that you don't get a lot. I've started to see more brewers come out with Cashmere. I'm assuming maybe it's a newer kind of strain of hop that's come out. I haven't seen a ton of it, but I have seen some more beers coming out, and I enjoyed it. So starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was huge. You could smell it from a very great distance away, and it smelled so fresh and hop forward. It was insane. Gave me really high hopes for what I would get into when I sipped on it. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Moving on to the taste, the aroma did not deceive or let me down. This beer was positively huge. It was positively packed with both hop aroma and flavor, and just massive fresh hop, big, juicy, fruity, bursty, hoppy goodness with all sorts of different classic hop flavor profiles, and it was just pungent and a big boot full of bitters. You don't get that often with the doubles or Imperials, whatever you want to call them, but this was very much an exception. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Moving on to the body. The body was nice. It was very robust. It had real presence, though it wasn't quite top tier for the ABV range. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't weak. It just wasn't top tier status. I only docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. Moving on to the mouthfeel. Mouthfeel actually surprised me a good bit. The body, okay, 1 point, that's not that big of a deal. It was very close. But the mouthfeel, while it was above average, it was nowhere near the thickness and viscosity that I expected for a double or Imperial IPA in this ABV range. It only gets a 7. Moving on to the finish. The finish on this beer was very nice. Each sip had quite a nice and well above average length to it, though this was another category where it wasn't quite as long as I anticipated for the style, and certainly for how hop forward and bitter forward the beer was. I did expect it to extend out longer than it did. but it was still well above average. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the head and retention, it was positively fantastic on this beer. Very thick, lush, creamy head. Looked like it could have been poured off of a tap. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the appearance, this beer was positively lovely. Normally when I get an Imperial, I expect to see a more amber, orangey, darker hue to it. They tend to have deeper roasted malts in them for some reason. This one did not. It stuck to a lighter malt bill, just higher volume, and it really was lovely. Had a slight hazy look to it. It was a gorgeous beer. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance, absolute slam dunk on the balance here. The malt bill that they chose, not only was it beautiful, but it paired well with the beer and really let all of the hops speak. And in an IPA, the hop is the star of the show. There was no exception here, and the hops that they put in abundance. And this beer was an absolute treat. Gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, I loved it. I try as many IPAs of as many substyles and genres as I can. I don't go to for my daily drinking pleasure Imperials typically because I'm let down. Most of the time the malt overpowers the hops. You don't get as much hop intensity. You get this caramelly quality to it and it just kills the bitters. That did not happen in this beer. This is exactly what I want in an Imperial. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, I nitpicked just a few categories here, and I had to call it how I see it, but frankly, this is one of the best Imperials I've had in recent memory, and I gave it top points. It gets a 10 out of 10. That brings the total score on County Brewers Collective Pile of Brains to a 94 out of 100. So very, very high scoring beer. This is absolute top tier for any Imperial. If you're a fan of the style and you can get your hands on it, I do highly recommend this one. Moving on to Noble Ale Works. First beer I ever had by this brewer. This was their Tongue Tickles Imperial IPA, clocking in at 8%. They are based out of Anaheim, California. This one had a blend of Citra, Galaxy, and Simcoe, so we're looking at high alpha acid content hops here. I didn't know what to expect, but at first sniff for the aroma, I was thinking, oh boy, I'm going to be let down here. The aroma was not very pronounced. You had to really get down over the glass. You could smell it was hoppy, and it smelled fresh. It just wasn't that pungent, so I thought it was going to be a weak beer. The aroma just gets average. It gets a 5 out of 10. As soon as I got to sipping on it, though, it was a complete 180 from my expectations. This beer was positively huge. It just whacked you in the face with hop pungency and bitters. It was massive. Just a massive boot full of hops. All of those delicious pungent hop flavors came through with maximum intensity, and same thing with the bitters. It was just a huge beer. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the body on this beer was equally huge. I mean, it just had massive presence. And it was kind of a ninja beer, if you want to think of it that way. Yeah, okay, I can't really smell it. Get her, okay, it smells okay. But then once you got into it, mind blown. This beer had a huge body. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, it was an equal story as the body. It was just huge and thick and viscous. This beer had huge presence and really much more than even just an 8% ABV would let on. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this beer was massively long. Each sip had a tremendous amount of length, and you just kept tasting all of those different hop flavors interplay and all of the bitters, and they were still very, very present and just lingered and lingered. Each sip was huge in terms of length. It gets a 10 out of 10. Moving on to the head and the retention. The head and retention on this beer was very, very good. It wasn't quite as good on the first one, but for at home, well above average, almost top tier. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the appearance, this beer was equally as lovely as the first. Again, Imperials, I typically expect that darker, kind of more ambery color hue, but both of these were a nice, beautiful, light color due to the lighter malt bill they used, and I think it's a good decision in an Imperial. Those lighter malts don't overpower the hops as well, and it lets the hops speak. It was beautiful. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance, same story here. I mean, this was just like the first one. The balance was impeccably well done. The malt bill was exactly right to let the hop shine through as the star of the beer style, and it happened in this beer in spades. Perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, I loved it. I absolutely love this beer. Really, the aroma was the only category where I was, oh gosh, I don't know. But once you got into it, it was just a whole nother ball game. This beer was intense. This is a hop lover's dream. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, same story with the Kings County Brewers beer. I nitpicked a couple categories, but overall this beer was just so strong as an example of what an Imperial IPA can and should be. It gets top points. It gets a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Noble Ale Works Tongue Tickles to a 94 out of 100. So both beers lost some points in different categories, but they both ended up with the same score, and 94 is very high. These are top tier. If you're a fan and you can get them, I highly recommend both of these beers. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just click the notification bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Till next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.